If you have diabetes, the time you drink water might matter almost as much as how much of it you drink. There are 5 specific moments in your day when a simple glass of water can quietly work with your body instead of against it. And most people managing blood sugar have never been told what they are. My name is Dr. Robert Vance, and one of the most common questions I hear from people managing diabetes isn't about medication or diet or exercise. It's about water. People ask if drinking more helps their blood sugar, and the honest answer is it's not really about drinking more. It's about drinking at the right moments in a way that actually supports what your body is already trying to do. Here's why timing matters at all. When your blood sugar rises from a meal, from stress, or simply from the natural rhythm of your body overnight, your kidneys respond by trying to filter some of that excess glucose out through your urine. That's a normal protective mechanism, but to do that filtering well, your kidneys need adequate water. When you're dehydrated, your blood becomes more concentrated, which means the same amount of sugar in your bloodstream can appear more concentrated too. Dehydration doesn't create high blood sugar out of nowhere, but it can make existing numbers look and behave worse than they might otherwise. Water won't replace insulin, and it won't replace metformin. What it can do is support the systems your body already uses to manage glucose. Let's talk about when. The first moment is right when you wake up before anything else. Overnight, your body goes 6, 7, 8 hours without fluid, and during that same stretch, your liver is often releasing stored glucose into your bloodstream, a normal process called the dawn phenomenon. So you're waking up mildly dehydrated at the exact moment your blood sugar may already be elevated. A glass of water before coffee, before breakfast, gives your kidneys a head start on managing that overnight rise. A regular glass, roughly 8 to 12 ounces, is a reasonable starting point. I want to pause here because I don't want this to sound like a one-size-fits-all instruction. If you have kidney disease, heart failure, or you're on dialysis, more water is not automatically better for you, and fluid intake should be something your own care team guides specifically. I'd rather you hear that clearly now than assume something that doesn't apply to your situation. The second moment is before meals, ideally 15 to 20 minutes beforehand. And it matters for 2 separate reasons. Water before a meal naturally moderates how much you eat, since it takes up some space in your stomach and supports the sense of fullness your body uses to know when to stop. A small, low-effort lever for a factor that matters a great deal in blood sugar management, portion size. The second reason is preparation. Eating raises blood sugar, and that's expected. But arriving at that meal already hydrated means your kidneys and circulatory system are better positioned to handle the rise smoothly, rather than catching up while also dealing with existing dehydration. I remember a patient, I'll call her Margaret since it's not her real name, though her situation was very real. Margaret had lived with type 2 diabetes for almost a decade. She checked her numbers regularly, was thoughtful about carbohydrates, walked most evenings, but her readings after lunch were consistently higher than expected, which frustrated her because on paper she was doing everything right. When we went through her daily routine, one thing stood out. She barely drank water during the workday, 2 cups of coffee in the morning, and often nothing else until lunch. She wasn't ignoring her health. She simply hadn't connected hydration to her glucose numbers at all because nobody had ever explained the link to her in a way that made sense. We didn't change her diet or her medication. We added one habit, a full glass of water about 15 minutes before lunch and another alongside her morning coffee instead of in place of it. Within a few weeks, her post-lunch readings were noticeably steadier. I want to be honest, this isn't a guarantee, and Margaret's body isn't your body, but it reflects something I've seen often enough to take seriously. If you check your blood sugar first thing in the morning before eating, this first checkpoint matters even more directly, because that fasting number reflects exactly the overnight period we're talking about, hours without fluid, combined with the liver's natural glucose release. Some people notice that a consistent morning glass of water, given a few minutes before testing, doesn't change the reading itself, since a single glass doesn't meaningfully dilute your bloodstream that quickly. What it does is support the same kidneys in circulation that will spend the rest of the morning working to bring that number back down toward your target range. The third moment is around physical activity, before and after. Muscles use glucose for fuel during movement, which is part of why exercise supports diabetes management in the first place. But exercise also increases fluid loss, and dehydration during activity can make blood sugar swing more unpredictably than it would with adequate hydration. You don't need a sports drink loaded with sugar. For most moderate sessions under an hour, Plain water is exactly what your body needs. If you're doing something longer or more intense, that's worth discussing with your doctor since certain medications change how your body handles exercise and fluid loss. The fourth moment connects to stress rather than food or movement. Stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, can raise blood sugar on their own, independent of anything you've eaten. It's your body's ancient survival response, except the danger today is more often a stressful email than an actual threat. Staying hydrated during acute stress supports your body's ability to bring that glucose rise back down once the stressful moment passes. Water doesn't eliminate stress, and it isn't a substitute for addressing its source. But a glass nearby during a hard meeting or a difficult conversation costs nothing and works quietly in the background. The fifth moment is the evening, roughly an hour before bed, and this one comes with a genuine trade-off worth knowing. Water before bed addresses that same overnight dehydration we started with, giving your body a head start rather than only responding after you wake. But a large volume right before sleep increases the odds of waking to use the bathroom, which disrupts sleep, and poor sleep is independently linked to worse blood sugar regulation the next day. My honest advice is a smaller amount, a few sips, not a full glass, finished at least an hour before you lie down. I know that laying out 5 specific times can start to feel like homework. On top of everything diabetes already asks of you, checking numbers, planning meals, remembering medication, staying active, attending appointments, I don't want water timing to become another source of pressure. The goal isn't perfection. If you only manage the morning glass and the pre-meal glass, that's still meaningful. Small, sustainable pieces are worth more than an ambitious plan abandoned after 4 days. There's a mistake worth addressing directly because I see it fairly often. Some people, once they hear hydration supports blood sugar, take the idea too far, drinking excessive water throughout the day under the assumption that if a little helps, a lot must help more. It doesn't work that way, and it isn't harmless. Excessive water intake can dilute your body's sodium levels, a condition called hyponatremia, which in serious cases is genuinely dangerous. This is uncommon in healthy adults and requires quite extreme intake to occur. But if you have kidney or heart concerns or take certain medications, your margin is smaller. Another detail that deserves an individual conversation with your physician rather than a general rule from a video. The goal is steady, reasonable hydration across your day, not a race to drink as much as possible. I'd also like to gently correct something I hear often, the idea that drinking a large amount of water can quickly flush excess sugar out of the bloodstream, almost like a rescue tool after a meal that raised blood sugar more than expected. Your kidneys do filter some glucose into urine once blood sugar crosses a certain threshold, and hydration supports that natural process, but it isn't a fast-acting correction. Drinking a large volume in one sitting won't meaningfully lower a high reading within minutes the way fast-acting insulin might for someone who uses it. Water works best as a steady, ongoing habit, not an emergency response after the fact. Thirst itself isn't always a reliable early signal either, particularly for people managing blood sugar. By the time you feel distinctly thirsty, you're often already somewhat dehydrated. And for some people with diabetes, especially when blood sugar has been running higher, that thirst signal can be more pronounced. Your body's own response to fluid lost through increased urination. If you've noticed unusually intense thirst that doesn't match your usual pattern, that's worth mentioning to your doctor specifically, since it can sometimes signal that blood sugar has been running higher than your current plan accounts for. As we get older, our sense of thirst tends to become less reliable. The body's signaling system simply doesn't work as sharply as it once did. This means older adults managing diabetes may need to be more intentional about these checkpoints, rather than relying on feeling thirsty as a cue. If you're caring for an older parent with diabetes, gentle reminders at these specific moments can matter more than you'd expect, since the person may not feel thirsty until they're already fairly dehydrated. Well, I think about another patient sometimes, I'll call him James, again, not his real name, but a fairly typical story. James had been recently diagnosed, still in that overwhelming early period where every piece of advice feels like one more thing to manage. What helped him wasn't one more complicated rule, it was something he could actually picture doing without a system or a spreadsheet. A glass of water when he woke up, a glass before dinner, his largest meal. That was genuinely where he started, and it gave him the sense that he could manage this condition rather than being managed by it. Confidence is often built from small, repeatable wins rather than dramatic overhauls. Let me spend a moment on something practical. How do you actually know if you're falling behind on hydration in a way that matters? The signals aren't always dramatic. Most people picture dehydration as something extreme, like feeling faint on a hot day. But for someone managing blood sugar, the early signs are often quieter than that. A dry mouth that lingers even after a meal, feeling unusually tired in the early afternoon in a way that doesn't match how much sleep you got, headaches that show up mid-morning without an obvious trigger, urine that's noticeably darker than pale yellow, one of the more reliable indicators most people can check for themselves. None of these signs are exclusive to diabetes, and noticing one occasionally isn't a reason to panic. But a pattern of them, especially alongside readings that seem higher than expected given your usual routine, is worth pausing on before assuming something more complicated is going on. It's also worth knowing that certain diabetes medications change your relationship with fluid. Some blood pressure medications people with diabetes are often prescribed, particularly diuretics, increase fluid loss through urination, meaning the person taking them may need to be more deliberate about these checkpoints than someone who isn't. Certain newer diabetes medications also have a mild diuretic effect as part of how they work. None of this means guessing at your own dosage or timing. It simply means that if you're on one of these medications, mentioning hydration specifically at your next appointment is worthwhile, so your doctor can tell you whether your fluid needs look any different from what I've described generally today. One more question worth addressing. What actually counts toward your daily fluid intake? Plain water is the foundation and should make up most of it. Flavored or sparkling water without added sugar is a reasonable alternative. If plain water feels monotonous, variety genuinely helps some people stick with a habit long term. Coffee and tea in moderate amounts count toward your overall intake too, even though caffeine has a mild diuretic effect for some, which is part of why I suggested pairing your morning water with your coffee rather than relying on coffee alone. What I'd caution against is relying on juice or regular soda as a primary fluid source. Since those introduce exactly the kind of glucose spike, this habit is meant to help your body manage more smoothly. I want to touch on why so much confusing advice exists around water and blood sugar in the first place. Part of the confusion comes from a real research finding getting stretched further than the evidence supports. A study might show a correlation between hydration habits and glucose stability in a specific group, and by the time it travels through a few rounds of headlines, it becomes water cures diabetes, or this drink lowers blood sugar instantly. That's not how good science translates into daily life, and it's not how your body works. The honest version is less exciting, but more useful. Hydration is one supportive factor among several, not a standalone fix. There's a question I get often that's worth addressing directly. Does the temperature of the water matter? For blood sugar purposes, honestly, no. This comes down to personal comfort rather than biology. If cold water is what makes you actually want to drink consistently, that's the right choice. If warm water feels more soothing first thing in the morning, that works just as well. Don't let a preference like temperature become one more barrier to a habit that's already simple. A related question, do you need electrolyte powders or specialized hydration products alongside this? For most people, most days, no. Your body maintains electrolyte balance well through a normal, varied diet, and plain water covers the vast majority of your hydration needs. Electrolyte replacement becomes more relevant in specific situations: prolonged intense exercise over an hour, significant fluid loss from illness, or heavy sweating in extreme heat over extended periods. Outside those situations, spending money on specialized products isn't something I'd consider necessary for supporting blood sugar through hydration timing. If your doctor has recommended electrolyte management for a specific reason, that guidance takes priority over anything general here. Let's connect this back to sleep for a moment, since it explains why the evening checkpoint carries that trade-off I mentioned. Poor sleep affects insulin sensitivity. After a night of disrupted rest, your body often needs more insulin to manage the same amount of glucose compared to a well-rested night. That creates a genuine balancing act with evening hydration. You want enough water to support your body through the overnight hours and reduce next morning dehydration, but not so much that you're waking repeatedly to use the bathroom, undermining the very sleep quality that also affects blood sugar. That balance is exactly why a smaller amount in the evening, rather than a full glass, tends to work better than either extreme. One more pattern worth mentioning, because I notice it often in the people I talk with: consistency across the week, not just across a single day. Many people are fairly disciplined on weekdays with structured meals and predictable timing that makes habits like these easier to remember. Then the weekend arrives, the routine loosens, meals shift later, and hydration quietly slips along with everything else. That's not a moral failing, it's simply what happens when structure changes. But if you've ever noticed your readings looking different on a Monday compared to a Friday, inconsistent weekend hydration alongside other routine shifts could genuinely be part of that pattern. You don't need weekend rigidity, but keeping at least the morning and pre-largest meal checkpoints steady, even when everything else shifts, can smooth out some of that week-to-week variability. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, it's this. Your body isn't working against you. The rises and falls in your blood sugar aren't random punishments, and they aren't a reflection of your discipline or your worth as a person. They're the result of biological processes. Some you can influence, some you can't. And understanding even a piece of that gives you a little more control over what actually is within your reach. 5 checkpoints in your day: morning, before meals, around activity, during stress, and a small amount in the evening. None of it requires perfection, and none of it replaces the plan your doctor has built with you. It simply supports it quietly in the background, the way small, consistent habits usually do. If this explanation clarified something you'd wondered about, I'd genuinely like to hear from you in the comments, whether you've noticed a connection between hydration and your own blood sugar, or whether any of this was new to you. And if you know someone managing diabetes who might benefit from understanding this a little better, consider sharing this with them. Sometimes the most useful thing we can offer someone isn't a dramatic solution. It's a small piece of clarity that makes their daily effort feel a little more manageable. This information is meant to help you understand your body a little better, and it doesn't replace individualized medical advice from your own doctor, particularly if you have kidney disease, heart failure, or a condition that affects how your body handles fluids. Understand your body before you fear it. That's really what all of this comes down to. I'll see you in the next one.